Hello again, everyone. I'm Ali Ibrahimia in another episode of The Fact, the series that discuss international issues every week. In this special episode, we have Mr. Ali Salaam, political activist and analyst from USA, and I would like to welcome him to the program. So for the first question, I would like to know about the roots of Zionism in basically in the world, and just in a very summarized way, please give us a general view of the history of Zionism.
First, I would like to start by saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and I extend the peace and blessings of God onto everyone who is watching. So the roots of Zionism, you could say, go deep into the racist and the supremacist beliefs that have been established by the distortion of the teachings of Moses, alayhi salam. We have, for example, the divinely revealed Torah and the great and magnificent Israelite prophets that came to guide human beings. Unfortunately, the people that they came to guide did not listen, and they ended up defying the prophets and twisting their words and taking out things and then replacing it with their own thoughts. And that has become today what we know as modern-day Judaism, which is a racialist, a race-based worldview that one group of people is superior to the rest of humanity. And that is just plain racism. And to point that out itself is not racism. I mean, it has nothing... We don't care about the race of people who are ascribed to Judaism or anything like that. It's not about hating them just for the sake of hating them. We despise any racist beliefs, no matter who it comes from and no matter which form. So this is just a result of that even-handedness in anti-racism. But this in particular has roots into distorting, unfortunately, divine guidance that has came to make people take people away from the ignorant viewpoints of racism. So the earliest incantations of Zionism actually came before anything known as Zionism ever existed. I asked the viewers to research Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalisher. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He actually proposed to establish a Jewish state in Palestine led by a rabbinate long before the first Zionist councils ever existed. And this was actually documented in a recent article by a very good and thorough journalist by the name of Whitney Webb for Mint Press News. I forget the name of the article, but you could just search Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalisher with Mint Press News on it. But then obviously the Zionist councils formed. And at the time when they first formed, they began to start to influence Western governments. The book Against Our Better Judgment by Alison Weir, another journalist. For example, in Alison's book, she cites a Jewish Academic Journal's article about a secret Zionist society called the Parushim, one of whose members was Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, and he got America to enter World War I as part of a promise to the British that if America entered World War I, they should write the Balfour Declaration. So you can see how international Zionist influence has essentially orchestrated various events in exchange for some kind of a political benefit. And the Balfour Declaration was like the thing that basically established not only Zionism, but specifically for Palestine, because there were some factions of Zionism that were only purely nationalistic, maybe without so many religious elements. But as I mentioned, with the Rabbi Zvi Hirsch Kalisher connection and many other things, the actual real aim of Zionism is from the Nile to the Euphrates. So it's even bigger than Palestine. They want that whole region, and that was actually put onto the gravestone of Ben Gurion. And that's, you could see Israeli policy to modern day being for that vision of a greater Israel. And even if there's not enough Jewish people on this earth to populate those areas, at the very least cause chaos and discord and bloodshed, so that those areas never see peace and they are weak in the face of the power of the Zionist regime. But thankfully that plan has failed, and now it is the Zionist regime who is becoming weak and will not last until 2040, inshallah.
So for the second question, do you think that is there any kind of influence of Zionists in Russia, and do you think the Russian government is somehow being affected by this influence or potential influence or not?
So with the Zionism in Russia, we have to actually understand the history of Russia. Russia started off in Kiev with the baptism of Prince Vladimir as an Orthodox Christian. And Orthodox Christianity, in the face of Jewish supremacism and then later Zionism, has been the most resilient compared to the other dominations of Christianity, mostly in the West. The Catholic Church in 1965 apologized for the correct interpretation of history that it was Jews who persecuted Jesus. And then obviously Protestantism in the United States and in, for example, England, they are the primary people who are responsible for Christian Zionism. So Protestantism is pretty much down the drain. Catholicism is on the brink, but Orthodox Christianity has been the most stable when it came to opposing Jewish oppression of Gentiles and Jewish wrongdoing and Jewish racism. So, for example, the Christian Tsar of Russia, close to the Russian Revolution, passed a series of laws that prevented Jews from engaging in business practices that were used to circumvent Gentiles, such as finance and other areas. So that if they want to earn a living, they have to do so in a way that doesn't hurt other people, doesn't oppress other people. But this enraged many of the bankers and everything like that. So you can look into the history of how the Russian Revolution was funded by Wall Street and how Leon Trotsky, who ended up with a gang of his to assassinate the Romanov family and the Tsar, they were connected to these Wall Street bankers. So once the Russian Revolution happened, and this is according to an article in the Jewish Daily Forward written by a Jewish author. This is a Jewish magazine written by a Jewish author. This is not my opinion, but the majority of people in the Bolshevik movement were Jews. And Lenin himself even has Jewish roots. So, although he may not be fully Jewish. This is according to an article, I think it was Time magazine who reported on this. But you can double check on the internet. So immediately when the Russian Revolution happened, criticism of Jewish supremacism and Jewish racism and Jewish power in general and its detrimental effects on Gentiles, forbidden, jail time, you cannot question anything about that. And then of course their war on Christianity, shutting down churches, shutting down monasteries, also even going after Islam, going after religion in general. This is not just motivated by pure atheism in the Marxist idea, but it's motivated by Jewish anti-Jesus viewpoints that are found in the Talmud, that believe that Jesus is in hell and boiling excrement and slanders the Holy Virgin Mary and with very bad names. So it's sort of a payback against Christianity for keeping their oppression of other people at bay. So that has led to pretty much 100 years of darkness in Russia. The communist revolution has not been a good thing for the most part, although it changed later with Stalin because he went against Trotsky, but still they weren't perfect. They weren't blemish-free and they have a lot of blood on their hands. And then it got even worse after the collapse of the Soviet Union with Yeltsin, who himself was a Jewish supremacist and a Zionist. And Yeltsin basically let a small group of Zionist bankers basically pillage the country, take all the resources and sell it off at fire sale prices. So then Putin came in.
So would you please give us a general explanation about the Zionist dominations on economic aspects in different parts of the world? And do you think, is there any kind of main domination by Zionists in the economic system of the world or not?
And then he basically said game is over, and he basically tried to rebuild Russia from scratch. But in order to do so, you have to play a balanced game because these people want to destroy the country. So you can't exactly fight against them head on without them causing another, for example, revolution or further destroying the country. The country needs to be rebuilt. So Putin does the realpolitik method in trying to, play the dirty political game as best as he can, and he's a fallible individual, and some of the decisions he makes, some of the strategies he makes are very poor and often maybe appearingly in their favor or maybe even directly in their favor. But when you actually look deeper beneath the surface, rather than on a one-dimensional analysis, you actually see that, and if you look at how many Jewish neocons and Zionist neocons in the United States, as well as Zionist Trotskyite leftists, Western leftists, are against Russia or against Putin, you can see where he lies. So I don't think he's in support of the Zionists, but because he's trying to play this realpolitik game, to rebuild the country, some of the decisions he makes are not perfect. But as far as their military strategy has been mostly against their favor. For example, in Syria and elsewhere, and Iran has not left Syria. Hezbollah has not left Syria. So all this imagination of Russia somehow trying to force them out, it hasn't happened. Whether they are, I don't think they are. But even if they are, they can't. Just like America, they can't do a damn thing. But I don't think they are. I think their force in the Middle East has mostly been a positive one, and we can see, in addition to the axis of resistance, which they're not part of, but they are not an enemy of either. We can see that the Zionist regime is weakening because of this stop to their Nile to Euphrates plan, which does include things like Daesh, which has included the invasion of Syria and Lebanon and everything like that. So if we actually go back to how I brought up the Balfour Declaration and how it was made as a promise in exchange for America's participation in World War I, who was the Balfour Declaration addressed to? You can look at the actual text. It's addressed to the head of the Rothschild banking family of the time, and they have endless amounts of money, and especially when they've taken control of the central banks of those countries, they also control the issuance of money. So they can even print themselves more money to be able to do what they want, and they control the politicians. So when they print more money, the politicians pass laws where the governments can take that new money and spend it as they please. So, and with obviously the creations of IMF and everything like that, they're trying to create a global economic hegemony, and with governments of the world at their disposal to create budgets and especially military budgets that are in their favor, or domestic budgets, for example, that penalize, for example, criticism of certain alleged historical events, as we see in Germany and many other places where you can go to jail for doing so, or in Canada where it's considered hate speech to speak out against Zionism, and you can get fined or jailed for that. So having money power is very important. And not only that, shaping the ideology of economics. Who has shaped economic ideologies of both capitalism and communism? So, for example, even in a place like the Islamic Republic of Iran, because some people go to the West and get their education from the West, for example, in economics, they go and against the wishes of the Islamic leadership in Iran, they, for example, take something like riba or usury or interest and try to put an Islamic smiley face on it and justify it through their Western education. Whereas in Islam, we have our own economic teachings. We have from Imam Musa Sadr. We have from Imam or Ayatollah Shahid Bakr Sadr with Iqtadat Sunnah and many other texts that give us a roadmap, both theoretical and practical, to a usury-free world. So this pervasive usury mindset has seeped into the economic thought of many schools of thought, even seemingly competing schools of economic thought. So this has, and usury itself is an oppressive, so just like Zionists maybe militarily and socially oppress Palestinians and others, there's that another form of oppression is economic oppression. You go into, for example, ghettos in America. You go to poor black neighborhoods, poor white neighborhoods, poor Latino neighborhoods in America, and you see the effects of usury, and you see how hard it is for people just to get by, while these bankers who don't do anything for a living, they don't even lift a finger, people lift their fingers for them, they're somehow able to live more comfortably than entire nations combined. And that is a great travesty, and that is one of the gravest crimes and the gravest sins is this type of financial oppression. And tying it back to Russia, there is definitely a tug of war politically, because there are still factions of Russian politics who are on the side of this internationalism. You could say maybe that's the Medvedev faction, there is a tug of war between the internationalists and the nationalists. And for example, there's a guest at this conference. His name is Alexander Dugin. He's written a book called Putin versus Putin, and how Putin himself even tries to balance these things, seemingly contradictory, whether out of pragmatism or out of poor judgment. I can't, I'm not exactly an expert on that, but that's for everyone to decide. But even in other countries, we can see there are nationalist tendencies, because there are, for example, other people, for example, from Germany, from this conference, who are trying to, establish German sovereignty away from the EU, away from the banking class, and away from these types of things, in order to establish dignity for their people. But they're being challenged, for example, by these people who ascribe to neoliberalism, neoconservatism, which is basically the bankers' favorite ideology that enriches them and enriches their corporate people, but keeps the rest of the people in states of poverty. France is an example we can see with the Yellow Vest movement. So, but we can see who the majority of the bankers and the majority of people who wield the strings of financial power, they are either Zionist Jews or Zionist Christians, and they support the state of Israel, which is essentially a criminal base for the Rothschild family. If you commit a financial crime, for example, one of the people that Putin prosecuted in Russia fled to Israel, and Israel cannot extradite him back to Russia or any other country, for example. So they really are like an international criminal mafia that hurt innocent people around the world, whether through bombs, whether through jail time for speaking out, or through just general economic oppression. And poverty is one of the worst man-made atrocities in our world at the time being.